Tonight we are going to be talking about ancient myths, and I am sure that between Mr. Archaeologist over here, Pat Lowinger, and Edward Dodge, that we can have a lot to dig up about ancient myths. And I want to just say hi to everybody in the audience. Thank you for joining us. This is our Patreon drive, so please consider giving us a little dollar so we can spread the good news. Pat, since you are our mythster, would you give us a little introduction about who you are? Because I'm not sure if everybody in the audience knows you.
Okay. Well, first of all, hi, Ed. We've never actually met.
Hi, Pat. How you doing?
It's actually nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
My name is Pat Lowinger. For those that have seen me before, I'm a professional archaeologist and historian, and I teach at a small community college in the Pacific Northwest. My interests are really paganism and religious studies in the Mediterranean world, which is now, due to funding, being transported into Roman Britain. But hey, let's just talk about changing paddles midstream, so to speak. I'm just here to talk about. Wes said we're talking about festivals, so that's what I have all up on my computer. But if you need me to pull some of the myths, I do have some of that.
I love festivals too.
Right, but so ask me something really here. I'm just going to refer to Josh Bowen's website or someone else, and we'll just throw Josh under the bus for not being here. And if there's any problems, it's definitely on him in pre-production.
I agree. Thank you very much for being here tonight. And Ed, if you wouldn't mind a little introduction, if people haven't seen you before here on the show, I'm sure they'd love to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, so I wrote a book called History of the Goddess from the Ice Age to the Bible, and my work is focused on the the goddesses in the Old Testament, Asherah, Astarte, Nanat, and the Kadesha priestesses, and that whole narrative that I think is really unexplored, that people really haven't gotten a full grip on. So I'm working on some new material now, and that takes a little bit further, a little more scholarly, and so I'm pretty excited about this whole topic.
Yeah, I can't wait to read all of your book. I've gotten about a third way through. It's pretty thick. It's jam-packed with information, right? But really, really interesting stuff. So, Pat, would you mind what is your favorite festival? Your favorite ancient festival? You've got to have one.
Well, so I like festivals associated with the dead in the ancient world. So the Romans, had two, one dedicated to the ancestor cult of the peaceful spirits. Then they had one associated with restless spirits, right? So those are my two famous Roman festivals. If you want to get that way, would be the Peritonalia and the Farenalia.
Oh, Peritonalia.
Yeah, parents honoring. That's where we get the term parents, right? That was honoring. That was a festival honoring. It was actually a week. You took a week to honor the dead, and it accumulated at the end of the week with the festival at the grave sites or monumental markers if your parents weren't buried in town for some reason, or ancestors, with a communal meal where you believe the shades of the dead. And it wasn't a negative thing, but their spirits would come and kind of dwell with you while you had this kind of remembrance. It was half solitude and honoring, and then half party. So it was like an idea of, first it was somber, then it turned into little raucous, little party with the dead.
Drinking brew through a straw because it's chunky.
And so what gods were associated? This is a Roman festival, you're saying? What gods were associated with it?
Well, there's several gods. I mean, the Romans had gods associated with the dead, not unlike other divinities. But the Romans kind of thought that the dead, particularly in graveyards, had liminal times of the year where they could come back to be honored. So the dead were never really gone. They were just another place unless you had a reason to bring them forward, or they had a reason to come forward. For example, if you weren't honoring the dead properly, they could become restless in death, right? Like they get pissed off. You're not honoring me. You're not coming to my graveside. They could be haunted. Ghosts were were basically undead spirits that either had met a tragic end and received proper funeral in most cases, or hadn't fulfilled some lifelong goal. But the spirits of the ancestors were seen as a benevolent force. So you would go talk to mom and dad if they were gone and ask them to do tasks that were kind of mundane. The gods themselves are too busy. Like, can you kind of guide and watch over this and bring me some good luck?
I love that.
Right? And basically, you didn't want to bother the major gods. So your parents and then ancestors beyond them became kind of like the protective umbrella. And later, that Roman tradition continues through. And you're not going to believe this, is slowly between the 3rd and 5th century in the Christian tradition, that festival, which is practiced by early Christians, by the way, and we have a lot of good evidence for it. Early Christians were still doing this festival, and ultimately bishops started discouraging it, replacing the final days of the Peritonelia. Okay, instead of working your parents and grandparents, you're going to start venerating saints. And so we see a transition into saint activities with the saints of the early Christian church from about the 4th, 5th century. But it was a very complicated process. So there would be, like, in Roman graves, man, you're going to get me way off track because we're talking about Christmas, but it's all good. They used to pour wine for the dead. So there'd be little holes in sarcophagi where you could pour a little beaker in for mom. Mom liked her wine in life, so give her some in death, right? And then, little food off be left out as well. So they were actually, ritually offered for. And we see in the Mediterranean and A&E, this was a pretty common practice. Ancient Israelites practiced this as well. So when they're all supposed to be monotheistic, they're still engaging in ancestor worship pretty late into, Second Temple period Judaism. So again, this was something a lot of cultures did. They believed the dead hung around. And so that's kind of one of my favorite festivals to think about.
That's really cool. Pour one out for the homies. Something that we
by the
still...
way, that's where it comes from. That tradition.
It really does.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just kind of saying that, but isn't that amazing how some things just kind of transcend time? That's really cool. Interesting. And you know what, Pat, since I apologize, I didn't even really think about the fact that you two haven't met each other. The reason that I wanted to get Ed in touch with you is because Ed was on a show here, and he was mentioning he'd like to run some ideas by some brilliant minds, and you and Dr.
And Josh wasn't available. Josh and Kip were busy.
No, honestly, you and him were the first two that came to mind that I thought would enjoy a conversation with somebody who's super interested and done a lot of research about it. So that's why we wanted to kind of get you all together.
I'm familiar with some of Ed's stuff, and I was just I was going to fanboy with him a little bit out over probably someone we both love is Mariana Givino. She book on the Assyrian sacred text has a whole section of her very detailed academic work on Asherah, and I think her book's about 10 years old, but she's I think she's University of Freiburg. She's pretty esteemed, and she's a very talented scholar. So, and I'm all fan.
I'm not specifically familiar with the work, but
we'll change emails, and I'll send you. I have some copies of some chapters that you might be interested in.
That's awesome. So you said that was Assyrian Sacred Tree?
The Assyrian Sacred Tree, A History of Interpretation, I think is the exact title of the book. I just finished reading it.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll just write that down to the list of books I probably won't get to read in another year or two. I have such a backlog.
What you do is, what I've learned is you read sections of books.
Yeah, I find myself...
You target chapters. You go like, oh, this chapter sucks. You just don't read that one. You read the next one, and then you go back and when you have to, you read it. But you read stuff first.
It's all these damn screens. It's a lot harder to get through reading books nowadays.
Yeah, I find myself reading something 2 or 3 times just to kind of before it even sinks in, and then if it even sinks in. So yeah, what that is, I don't know. What about you, Ed? Since you have, as I said, you have a lot of information in your book. What is it that you find fascinating about some ancient festivals? Do you know of any?
Well, I mean, the 2 festivals that really come to mind are certainly the Eleusinian Mysteries and the Dionysian festivals that go along with those. And then also, the name is escaping me, but the big Babylonian week-long festival where they have the sacred marriage and the New Year's festival. They read the Enuma Elish. and they have the hieros gamos between the king and the priestess and the ritual. Are you familiar with this tradition, Pat?
Not well. I'm familiar with it, probably less so than you. But Josh is supposed to be here talking about it, so we should put a link to Josh in
just a womp womp,
like a cardboard cutout.
There's a couple
place a Syriologist here, right? We'll just put his photo in.
Thanks, Josh, for leaving me out. Hang on.
Speak of the devil.
Speak of the devil. Hello there. Welcome.
How are you guys?
Hey, Dr.
Late, but always on time.
And a Syriologist is never late. They arrive precisely when they intend to.
I see. Well, with your little time machine, I'm sure you can travel all around the world with your knowledge, your little time machine in your brain there. So probably makes sense to you. Oh, thank you to our new patron, Shannon Gray. Thank you, Shannon. We appreciate that. We are doing a Patreon drive, y'all. Whoop, whoop. Awesome. Yes, it really it does help the channel. And don't forget your likes and your shares also help drive people here. We understand not everybody can afford to help support the channel, but just spreading the word, somebody else might be able to. So thank you.
Ryan,
Dr. Josh.
sorry.
Go ahead. No, please.
Josh has learned that he doesn't actually have to be in a stream for me to put him into a stream. It's a recently thing that he's been noticing. I will put Josh in a stream without Josh knowing he's in a stream. So now he might as well appear in person.
And say things like, Dr. Josh was supposed to do this. And I'm watching this at 1 a.m. and going, what was I supposed to do? I don't remember that.
Is it like Beelzebub? Say your name 3 times and you just appear or something?
Roughly.
Dr. Josh. Here he is. We were just, I don't know if you heard anything, if you were backstage at all, but we were just kind of talking about ancient festivals, and I had asked the gentleman if they had a favorite. Is there anything that would you like to start kind of how we were going to go and start in ancient Sumer? Give us an idea, timeline of kind of what happened?
Yeah, I mean, so actually when Wes initially asked me to do this,
what did he tell you? Because I don't know if we're all getting different messages.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was just talking to different people, but the message that I got was we're going to talk about mythology. And so I was like, oh, okay. I mean, like, I can talk about mythology. I mean, just in general. And then when he confirmed last week, it was something about winter festivals in Mesopotamia. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's very different and would require a lot of research. Yeah, because that's sort of a subfield in
Here's the thing, when you have
the one I mentioned that you might be able to deal with is I remember the name now, the Akita Festival from Babylon. That's pretty well documented. I hope you have some insights on that one.
Yeah, so actually there's a video if people are interested, obviously. Not right now. Don't go look at it now. But there's a short little video where I sort of summarize on our channel the Akitu Festival. But it's a New Year's festival, but it's probably one of the more interesting festivals, not that I've looked into a lot of them, but that I've, looked into in particular. And a lot of it is reconstructed. It's not like we have tons and tons of primary source information about it, but I think we have enough that we have a pretty good idea what's going on. It was an annual festival, obviously, in Mesopotamia, and it was incredibly important. Because so if anybody's familiar with the book of Daniel, there's a story about Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar is supposed to have gone crazy for 7 years and left. This is actually probably the writer mixing up his histories and confusing traditions about Nebuchadnezzar or about another king called Nabonidus. With Nebuchadnezzar. Nabonidus was a Neo-Babylonian king who took like a 10-year hiatus and left Babylonia. And being gone, it meant that they couldn't celebrate this Akitu festival. It was a really, really big deal because the festival was centered on the god Marduk. And if anybody's ever read any Akkadian literature, they're probably familiar with the Enuma Elish, which is a story about the ascendancy and supremacy of the god Marduk. And in the story, he fights against Tiamat, the sea goddess, and defeats her, and then he's, made the supreme god. And of course, this is what we see sort of polemicized in places like Genesis chapter 1. But the interesting thing, and I know I'm sort of have a lot of loose strands out here right now, I'll bring them back together now. The festival involved the recitation of the Enuma Elish. And the reason for that is because the festival is about Marduk, right? And so all of the, many of the Babylonian deities, their statuettes, their statues, would be taken out of their temples, the cells of their temples, and would be, they'd go on like a procession, and there's a little like shack that's down along the river, and they'd, go and they'd spend the night there, and it's a whole deal. But for me, the most interesting part of the festival is that so if you think about the political history of the region, you have two different countries, two different powers: Babylonia in the south of Iraq, in between the Tigris and Euphrates, and then Assyria in the north. Well, for the first half of the first millennium BCE, Assyria, the power in the north, was like the dominant power in the region. And their god was the god Asher. Their main deity was the god Asher. And Marduk was the main deity in the south. And there was always tension between Assyria and Babylonia. Of course, Babylonia is where the Akitu festival is celebrated. But Assyria had deep ties to Babylonia, right? Because it's all sort of one very, the regions influence one another greatly, historically. And so the king of Assyria up in the north was very, very careful to make sure to revere, the sites, the cities in Babylonia, as well as their gods, in particular, the god Marduk. And one of the things that would happen during the Akitu festival is the Neo-Assyrian king, who was in charge, he would make the trip down to Babylonia, and he would stand before the priest, and the priest would like submit himself essentially to the priest of Marduk, and the king would have his vestments removed from him, and he would be grabbed by the ear by the priest, forced down onto his knees, and he would say things like, "I have not, hurt the people of Marduk. I have not destroyed any of his cities," and the priest would slap him across the face, and with the goal of making him cry. And if he cried, it was a really good omen. If he didn't cry, it was a really bad omen. But the whole point was that the Neo-Assyrian king was saying, I venerate Marduk, and I submit myself to him. This is why it was such a big deal. And I'll shut up. But if you guys are familiar with, and I assume that you might be, just because of the intertextuality that takes place between texts like the Enuma Elish and what you see in the Hebrew Bible. But there was a time when the Neo-Assyrian king sort of laid waste to some degree to Babylon, because he was really, really tired of it, Sennacherib, and it was a bad time for them. And what he did is he took many of the tablets, these mythological texts, some of them anyway, back up to Assyria when he left after wreaking havoc on Babylonia. And what we see from that period, and it's not, we've got several copies, at least fragments of them, but we have an Assyrian version of the Babylonian story, the Enuma Elish. And they didn't remake it. All they did essentially was take out the name Marduk, the name of the god, the Babylonian god Marduk, and replace it with Asher. the Neo-Assyrian god.
Find, replace in the document.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's
copy paste.
Yeah, I mean, they rewrote it, but they didn't. They didn't. They didn't like chisel out the name or something in the tablet. But they rewrote the story, but the story was the same. It's just now it's about Asher and not about Marduk, and that has all its funny problems. But this is why that was such a big deal, because there was submission that was supposed to. To take place, and that was I think a significant factor, at least moving forward for the Neo-Assyrian kings. But that's some of the cool stuff about the Akitu festival.
Yeah, they called it the ritual humiliation of the king, and it was an annual part of it. And it's actually kind of a cool thing that shows that some humility by the leadership, that they have to submit to the gods. And it's something we don't see today. You don't see any of our leadership today ritually humbled or ever accept any humility at all. So it's kind of a...
May I volunteer?
It's kind of a cool...
humiliate and humble somebody with a slap.
And then they've got another day of that festival is the Hieros Gamos, is the sacred marriage, where the king has got to go, behind closed doors with the priestess. We don't know precisely what happened, but it's, presumably a sex ritual, or at least it was in some eras. And so that's like another day of this. It's like a week long or more long festival. It's the biggest festival of the year.
So it's something that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying there's a lot of cool stuff involved with it. So.
I feel like the festivals of today. I was just going to say I feel like the festivals of today don't compare to what was happening thousands of years ago. Is it me?
I mean, I think that. Of all the modern festivals, probably the one that speaks to me the most is Festivus, right? Because it's
for the rest of us.
Festivus for the rest of us. Yeah, the feats of strength.
I got a poll over here. Sorry, y'all.
This is supposed to be academically minded, Josh. Let's try to focus. Sorry, I'll mute.
Damn it. No, don't mute, but I just feel as if what we have today just kind of doesn't seem as well. I should say in America, maybe, because I've seen some other festivals around the world, phenomenal, colorful, really cool. But I can see how they're super important, intrinsic in your culture, participating. And if you have a king who's just kind of negating his duties, like I'm sure to the people who are doing these traditions, like it doesn't look so good. Like that's going to be a problem.
And of course, it obviously had a political propagandistic motive, right? I mean, Sennacherib, in the Neo-Assyrian kingdom, had, as did other kings, but had a tremendously difficult time trying to keep the south, to keep Babylonia in check. And part of the reason that was the case is that Babylonia was made up of several different groups. And so some of them were like the old true Babylonians. You had other groups that were less loyal, perhaps. And so there was always rebellion that was fomented, and there's always the king's always having to go down and try to squash stuff. And there's always the Elamites, from Iran, they're coming across and trying to help because they like things being unstable there because it gives them some more power. And so, the idea of keeping things in the South under sort of a firm grasp. What I picture at a very low level when I talk about this is that picture of Donald Trump standing in front of that church with the Bible upside down, obviously at a very low level, but I mean, it's hard for me to believe that there was real religious conviction necessarily behind that. Not that there wasn't religious conviction in the past, but there was a very obvious propagandistic control function, that went into that. So,
Sennacherib, isn't he the one that desecrates Babylonia or desecrates Babylon and unleashes the, breaks open the canals and sends the water in and floods the city, and then don't his own sons murder him after that fact for desecrating the temple, and he's in the Bible?
Yeah, so this is there are several traditions that sort of go with Sennacherib. He's the one that John Brinkman back in I think the 80s wrote like a lengthy monograph talking about all of the woes that the Neo-Assyrian Empire under him he spent so much money trying to keep Babylonia in check. And this is why, I know we're probably getting off topic, sorry, but it is really interesting from like a geopolitical or whatever point of view. If you look in the Bible, you see that certain kings like have really long reigns, and then certain kings,
about that.
Some of them have really short reigns, and often it is directly tied to what's going on in the Neo-Assyrian or the Neo-Babylonian Empire, but mostly in the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Because when the kings of the Neo-Assyrian kings were strong, they would campaign. They'd campaign out to the west. And when you've got the Neo-Assyrian army like marching by, and doing this show of force, you tend to stay in check, right? You tend to stay in line. But when things are unstable in the homeland, and the Neo-Assyrian king is having to figure out economic crises, or he's having to put down rebellions near his home, down in Babylonia. Now he's caught up with all that stuff. He can't make his campaigns. And now, you're a little king over here with a bunch of other little petty kings that are all paying tribute to the Neo-Assyrian king. And you kind of get around and you're like, hey, he hasn't been here. And I heard problems at home, Let's form a little coalition, right? And let's throw off the chains, as they always say in the text, and throw off the yoke. And so they rebel. And if the Neo-Assyrian king can't do anything about it, then you get a nice long reign. You're kind of off by yourself, do your own thing, because the king can't be bothered to come over and put it down because he's got other stuff to deal with. But boy, you get somebody like Tiglath-Pileser III or something, when they get strong again, when they get, their 8th century ire up, now they're marching back. They're creating real problems for these petty kings. So, and that's why Nebuchadnezzar was such a big deal, because when he came to power, it was like, I'm not messing around. And so it became a real issue for the kings of Israel and Judah.
It's just early for Jerusalem, that's for sure.
Yes, definitely.
I've always found the concept of a negative confession. Like I got first exposed to it like studying, Egypt, the negative confessions associated with, the cult of the dead and afterlife, right? The fact that, the negative confessions, I have not done this, I have not done that. And then you see it in Mesopotamia as well. Yeah. The idea that it's a pronouncement you haven't done something. It's like, rather than, it's declaratory, and it's like a personal attestation that you haven't violated these major cultural taboos. And I find that very interesting, rather than saying I won't versus I haven't. It's kind of, this idea of a positive cultural motif that is a negative attestation. I think it's kind of fascinating.
That is interesting. No, don't be sorry. I have a question. Do you think you all would know, are festivals also to kind of keep people happy, like chill them out, give them something to look forward to? Like, are some of these just to placate?
Certainly in the Roman era, for sure.
Really?
Like the Saturnalia?
Yeah, I mean, they've got all this unemployment.
Okay.
They drive people off the land, and replace the peasant farmers with slaves. This is like the backbone of the Roman economy, and force all these peasants into the cities where there's not really that much work. And so they give them free allotments of bread and beer, and festivals, and that kind of keeps the populace in line. And as long as the bread and beer are flowing, the people are kind of okay. But then when that system breaks down, the people uprise. But that was, slavery and pushing people off the land is a big part of what happens in Rome, and why it's so important for the Roman emperors to keep the poor folks happy with, free stuff, basically, in the cities.
It was two ways to decrease the Roman city's the city of population in Rome in particular. Raise a new legion to go conquer people, because there were certain eligible males that could be recruited from, or public games. That's how you in festivals, right? That's in feeding the people. It's hard to believe how big Rome was as a population and supported, but you're talking 1 million people in the ancient world, all in one place at minimum at certain times. And, some historians go, it was probably larger than that, but the conservative estimate is 1 million people, at the height of Rome's population. And we won't see that again until Constantinople about 5 centuries later. So it's kind of amazing when you actually look at how dense the population get in the ancient world. And then you have all the logistics: food, water, sanitation, housing. Sorry.
And no, as far as like calendars go, because I guess calendars are a way of record keeping. Or what? Am I asking something stupid?
No, just bad joke between me and Josh.
Oh dear. Because I've read about like one of the oldest calendars. Like I think it's an Akkadian. I'm not sure, but I find it really interesting to see how timekeeping was so based on, back in the day, astrological stuff. And now we're so focused on looking at the watch and whatnot. Are there any festivals that are particularly like geared toward the stars, sun,
Well,
anybody?
Yeah. So
I think that this is probably one for Pat. And the reason that I say that is, you guys might not know this, but he was soundly defeated in a debate a couple months ago by a brilliant scholar, on the topic of calendars. And I don't know if you guys realize this, but, because you have been submitted to a 7-day week, this is actually evidence that Jesus is Lord of all.
Oh God!
And so Pat went into this debate, with his chest kind of puffed out, like he was really going to do something, and this person led him to Christ.
Let's lead you away. Let's lead you back to Satan, please. Back to the good side.
But obviously, I said that with my tongue firmly set in my cheek. But no, he did so much research on calendars and festivals, and yes, I actually think he's super excited, aren't you, Pat?
I am, but it's a huge subject, and I only scratched a little bit below the surface to tell you that when we talk about calendar systems, particularly in the A&E, we are talking about not only calendar systems like one ubiquitous calendar system, because there's really no single calendar. What we have is the evolutionary calendar that starts in the south, is transmitted to the north, somewhat changed, because what happens is they're getting better at astrology the entire time, and astronomy, because they're mixed. So when you say astrology or astronomy in the ancient world, you can't ancient people didn't distinguish it. It was all one system for the most part. They knew the difference between planets moving, but their mythology was so linked with it. It was a divination system at the same time. So as they got better at the astronomy part, they had to refine the calendars. They'd go, wait a minute, and they would get better at their divisions of time, to where by the time you're in the first millennium BCE, it's a crackerjack calendar. It's been refined for at least 2 full millennia, to where it is the most accurate calendar of the time period. And the fact they had multiple calendars all operating at once. You had a civil calendar, all the days that you got to show up to pay your taxes, army has to report for mustering, and that was divided into this 360-day block with this reconciliation period often, depending on which calendar system they were under. Basically, days you're going to add every so many years to make the calendar right again. Then you had this very complex religious calendar, which was based on the lunar calendar. Wait a minute, because religious festivals were lunar based, not secular. What do you mean they're not secular? They may occur on a secular day, but what set them up each month was the new moon, right? This idea that this transition, because the moon had not only, importance in agriculture and a lot of other things, just keeping track of time. We knew we could calculate every 29 and a half days is a new lunar cycle, but it was this concept that we could also, it was a divine renewal each month. We had this symbolic rising and dying of a new moon, of a new period. So this is This is the divine imagery. Couldn't be ignored. And so you have these, we have to keep this calendar, but we really like this other one that's really organized. The administrative calendar, we need this because we need to know in a year what we're going to be doing in that other country. So this idea to be able to project out, that was really important for the legit region, and then be able to go back in time, because they can just take old calendar systems and go back and go, okay, that's why, 400 years ago because they were reconciling their time periods as well. Just think about the correspondence issue. Again, I don't want to bog everybody down on this. You're talking to the Egyptians. Right. You're in Babylon. You have official correspondence. You're talking about days that you're going to meet up. Two different calendar systems. Then you had to have people trained in both of those calendar systems. Then being able to reconcile both those calendar systems. But then the Hittites want to show up. The Neo-Hittites are like, well, we want in on this. And their calendar system might be a little bit different. Their administrative calendar is often different, right? But the religious calendar may have some overlap as well. So, it's this, remember, part of state diplomacy, this is the part Josh could probably talk about a little bit more than I can, is when things are going good between two of these kingdoms, you have temples, kind of like diplomatic temples in these cities. So the Hittites would honor the gods of Egypt. Small, never is pristine, but often you have dignitaries in those cities. Sometimes you have inter familial marriages, right? Like, I'm going to send my daughter from Egypt to the Hittites for diplomatic relations. So her gods have to be honored, which meant keeping the religious calendar in Egypt in check, right? Because this is all part of the state system. And so these ancient peoples were really astute at how to reconcile these calendar systems, and it becomes very complex because there were calendars reconciled in antiquity that people go, well, how'd they figure this out? And it's because they're really, really smart. And we always think that they're not as smart as we are. And in some places, when it comes to mathematics and logistics, they were just as smart. And at times, because of the lack of technology, they may have actually been more specialized in everyday knowledge than many people, like everybody goes, oh, engineers are really smart. Yeah, we're ancient calendar specialists in Assyria.
So, right, I have a question.
I've got a question. Can I ask a question?
No, go ahead. I'm going to write mine down. Go.
Okay. The biblical date of creation at being put at 4000 BC. I heard William Lane Craig say that even in those days, they knew that was not a true date for creation. That is a symbolic date that they're choosing, because they surely knew that the world was much older than that, because the towns that they were living in were much older than that. And the calendars, as you're saying, Pat, you would know more about this than I. So I'm asking, to what extent do you think? How far back do you think they knew the world was? What there was their sense, and to what would be your theory behind choosing that specific 4000 BC date?
So the writers of the Bible were pretty late in the game. We're talking the middle of the first century, middle of the first millennium BC.
Right.
So they just pointed back as far as their cultural identity would permit them. And this is really the problem. Right. When you get into the study of this period, they go, well, a long time ago. A long time to them was 4000 BC. To a region like Mesopotamia, let's just call them the Sumerians, that's 4000 BC is really at the point where, they've already started, they're not forming big cities yet, but they're already coalescing. We see in Egypt, in the pre-dynastic period, Nikeda periods, 4000 BCE, the Egyptians are forming settlement complexes as well. They don't have cities yet. So that was happening at the time. So they projected, again, places like Sumer, places like, even you see it in the Mycenaean Minoans, and I'm sticking in my wheelhouse here, but in Egypt as well, they projected back to a very distant mythical past that was kind of shrouded in mystery because they didn't want to give a definitive date. Unlike this later group in the Levant who said, yeah, we got a date for you. They're like, because we're going to give ages on our patriarchs. Mm-hmm. Many of Mesopotamia, they left it kind of nebulous, like a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. That was their answer to it. Just same thing if you read something like Hesiod, right? He talks about these past ages of mankind. And the Greek tradition was like just a long fucking time ago. Like when you're doing the translation, it doesn't mean like a little while ago. It means way back. And Egyptians, and from what I know, again, not my area of focus, especially it's this guy over here. the Mesopotamians appeared doing the same thing. They really language that made it seem ancient and beyond knowing. Like in a lot of ways, like the gods a long time ago did this. Well, how long ago? A long time. Well, how long is a long time? Well, you stopped asking after the priest 4 or 5 times because they were saying a really long time ago. Well, how long a really long time ago? Like, oh, really, really long time ago. Like, how long, right? But it was kind of like our concept of eternity. If we had a date fixed at the end, it was like, it's a concept. It's not really it's not so many years. It's a concept of sometime before we have a memory, but the gods were there, so the gods know.
Yeah.
Think of it.
I think that's an important thing you said, like in the mythical past. And actually, I think that's probably a pretty good way to describe it. So there's a genre of texts that are incantations. And obviously, Pat knows an awful lot about this stuff, but and there are people that spend their entire careers, I'm not one of them, delving into incantations. But one of the things that they do, and you see it also in mythological texts and literary texts, is it'll say, like, in those days, in those distant days, and quite often, even in like medical texts, there is this concept of back in the golden age, right? Back before shit got fucked up, right? And so one of the things that incantations do, one of the things that some of these medical texts do, the idea is to take the patient and supernaturally put them back into that period, because it's in that period that they can then, be brought out of this, inflicted disease. And so the incantation places the patient back in that time. And so again, like when you read through something like the Sumerian King List, which our earliest copies of it go back to like near the end of the 3rd millennium. So it's not like obviously that's old for all you other ancient people, but for us in Mesopotamia, where we invented writing,
Egyptologist.
sick flex, Josh. No, but that it's still relatively later. When writing is, at the end of the 4th millennium, seeing it at the end of the 3rd millennium, but the dates that are given there, the time frames that are given, 28,800 years for the reign of a particular king.
Yeah.
So I would caution anybody listening to this to, take with a proverbial grain of salt anything that somebody like William Lane Craig says about ancient Near Eastern.
No, it was just that he was making the point that it wasn't a literal date, that he would have, that the biblical writers would have understood that to not be a literal date.
Yeah, getting to what ancient people thought is a very tricky and difficult. Obviously everybody on this panel knows that, but just everybody in the audience, it's tough to get at what is it that they thought, what is it that they believed. And so arguments are obviously made. We'll look at the round nature of these numbers, look at the sexagesimal system. And so you could divide these out, and people have made elaborate arguments about Genesis 5 and the dates that are given there, and they do it about the Sumerian King List. I think there's probably a lot more to it than just let's get the numbers lower by using these larger numbers to divide down. I think it's more nuanced than that, and because again, there is this concept, even in literary texts like Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata, where writing is invented in the story itself. There are just mythological, obviously, aspects to so much of the story. Set aside things like the Anzu bird, right? That Lugal Banda, goes and set that stuff aside. and Lugalband and the Anzi bird, and that whole I'm trying to get the genre, the section of the genre that deals with this country far out to the east, called Arata. There's so much involved here in distances, in time frames. Even the text itself is like, back when languages were one way, but now they're going to be this other way. It's projecting back. And I don't know that it's going to be so simple to ascertain, the writers thought X or did not think X. If people are interested in reading about the sort of the original text that Genesis 5 sort of develops or polemicizes, maybe, you can read Klaus Wilke, has some good stuff on the Sumerian king list. Piotr Steinkeller, Michalowski, I think, has some stuff on it, but people can email me and I'll get it to them. But it's just, it's a very complicated document that I think meaning is probably not so straightforward. But I would just say people like, sorry, and I'll shut up, but like people like William Lane Craig, Edward, I'm definitely not knocking you for bringing him up. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just trying to keep everybody in this discussion sort of keep their guard up a little bit, because people like William Lane Craig obviously have theological motivations. So when he comes out and says things like, well, let's rethink about Adam and Eve. Well, that's in light of what we now know, about evolutionary biology or something. And so when people like James Hoffmeyer, who's an Egyptologist of a Trinity, I really respect the guy's work in many cases. When you get to something like the Exodus, he's got a stake that's been, nailed down into the ground. And so he has to figure out how to maneuver the data around that. And so when, Exodus 12 says there's 600,000 people that left Egypt, well, now he knows that can't be, right? He's an Egyptologist that knows what he's doing. He can't, there's no way the New Kingdom supported 3 million Israelites, leaving. And so now he's got but that's a stake that's driven in the ground. So he's got how do we work the data around that? I can't say the text is wrong. So I've got to say, maybe it doesn't mean 600,000 people. Maybe it means 600 military units, or something.
6,000 people.
Yeah, right. Something much, much smaller. And so, but you can see the commitment. So that's what I say. It's tough. That was a really long-winded way of saying it's tough.
If I can add just one thing.
Yeah.
Like the paradigm shift, I'm going to give you an example. Ancient people, from the best we can tell, look to the past. The modern age was a fallen period. So when we think about medical stuff, because they had similar concepts, medical technology, we always assume in our modern age is going to be like Star Trek in the future. You're going to walk in, they're going to wave a wand over you, and it's going to be nearly magical, but it'll be science. You'll get your cancer cured by taking one single pill, right? That's how we view the future. Ancient people saw that it was never going to get better than it was right now, technologically speaking, because the gods were more removed than they had been in previous times. The divine element was in the past. So in order to get like Star Trek, instead of going forward in time, you had to go back in time. That it was always behind us was greater. We think a lot of times as modern people, going forward will be better. That's not the mindset of ancient people. They saw what they were living as a fallen state of mankind, where when bad things happened, it was not only explainable, it was expected. And so things weren't going to never get better, but they could be okay. But if they did decline, that was just part of this natural progression of what they saw, these cycles. So it is a paradigm shift in cultural attitude that I don't think a lot of modern people can get their head around. That, what do you mean it's not going to get better in the future? Because the cultural symbology, right? Because we assume everything's going to be Star Trek, right? Or again, we have this dystopian.
Do you think that was a really general attitude, like across the ancient Southwest Asia, if you will?
I think it's the Mediterranean was also similar. Greeks and Romans had very similar attitude. Egyptians had really good attitude towards the afterlife. So even though it kind of was like, okay, while they were here, they were definitely going to get something on the other end that was pretty happy. The Egyptians saw the afterlife as kind of an eternal reward. Again, out of all the cultures of the ancient period around the same time, the Egyptians, in my opinion, and I'm sure someone's going to yell at me in the chat, the Egyptians, for the period of time study, appear to have the most positive attitude towards the afterlife, absence a few Greco-Roman mystery cults, right? But generally, Egyptians were like, hey, when you die, you may have been a farmer, but you're going to be a farmer in the afterlife. You're never going to go hungry. You're always going to have enough beer. You're going to have as much sex as you want with your wife. And when you work, you're never going to really have to toil. It'll be easy. It's like happy.
Yeah, you don't want to be turning to Mesopotamia and right. The southern Levant for for your positive afterlife.
No, but same thing with ancient Israel. It was kind of
that's what I mean.
It's bad.
Yeah,
not good.
I mean, it's not hell.
It's just done. You're just done.
You're like boring as hell.
Abraham's down there just waiting for people to visit. Just like,
right. It is very interesting. I gave a presentation that I'm probably gonna have to dip out. But I gave a presentation a couple months ago on ancient cosmology in ancient Near East and in the Hebrew Bible, and then the talk flowed into ideas of the afterlife in those two areas. And it really is like you don't have this concept of like punishment afterwards. And it's not like the Hebrew Bible has this unified idea of the afterlife, much to, I'm sure, many people's chagrin. But it's just sort of, you're just sort of done, right? And if you do know anything, it's boring. And, it's there's dust that builds up on the door and the bolt, right? I mean, it's just like people are in feathers, and it's just weird. It's a weird description that they give, but it's all about it's just really boring and blah, and really live it up while you're here, right? Because it's not like it gets better afterwards. But guys, thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
I know you guys put in the private chat to plug something. I do want to plug. Yes. I don't know if you guys all know, but Megan, it has a new podcast. She is the host of Bart Ehrman's podcast, Misquoting Jesus.
Shut up. That's awesome.
He handpicked her. It's not like she applied, and out of a select group of people, he said, yeah, I want her. He contacted her and said, unsolicited, and said, I want you to be the host of my podcast. Awesome. So he and Megan every week on the Misquoting Jesus podcast go on. I'm super, super proud of her.
No, that's amazing. I'm so happy
great
for her.
Yeah, so definitely go check that out. He's, of course, if you guys know Bart, he's a super nice guy, but obviously unbelievably brilliant. So, but I did have somebody at Clubhouse, if you guys are ever on Clubhouse, get some real scholars on there, tell me that Bart Ehrman is just a real moron who didn't know anything, and he was able to pick his arguments apart. And then Oz asked him, oh, so what are your qualifications? What's your you have a lot of Greek training? No, I work in HVAC, which is not bad, obviously.
So a lot of wind.
Very difficult, but I mean, it's you're
saying.
You're not reading Greek while you're doing HVAC usually. So it's just frustrating. But anyway,
thank you so much for joining us, and we absolutely love your channel. I'm sure if people in the audience have not seen you before, I don't know how they haven't, but Digital Hammurabi, and obviously Meg's on there too. I was just watching her read the Tablets of Gilgamesh. I think she said it was the 150th anniversary of them being unearthed. So that's freaking a festival. Celebrate.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
awesome.
And her, her melodious voice. You just can't.
Oh my God. And the hair, please. Yes. Goddess. Anyway, thank you so much, Josh.
Thank you guys for having me on, and good to talk with you guys.
Nice to meet you.
Take it easy.
Bye.
All right, gentlemen, it's back to us. we are coming up on the 1 hour mark. So if there is any questions in the audience, please make sure y'all getting them in. But
we didn't talk about any festivals.
No, I know. I wanted to hear about like Saturnalia or something, or I don't know, Mithra or
another time. No, Ed, do you have anything you want to talk about? Because Josh and I were taking way more of the conversation than we should have.
I mean, I could talk about the goddesses and stuff.
Oh, we love goddesses.
We do. What's your favorite goddess?
Well, the one I'm really most focused on right now is, the goddesses in the Bible. So I've got sort of two answers to that question. I really like the gnarly goddesses, Kali and Anat. Kali is a particular favorite of mine. And then Anat for the Bible, I think, is really just a tremendously underappreciated character that people have really not recognized just how enormously powerful she is, and that I would argue that she's the most powerful piece on the chessboard in the mythological pantheon of the Canaanites and the Israelites, that she has the power to destroy God, and she walked right up to him and threatens to smash his skull in. So people have really not really delved into the full character of Anat. And then also Venus, I think, as the Queen of Heaven, and the thing in my work that I'm focused on is the connection. Everyone makes the connection between Inanna and Ishtar and recognize that that's the same goddess, but they don't as much are talking about that she also continues on as Astarte in the Bible, and that Astarte is very much just a continuation of Ishtar. She's also the Queen of Heaven. So she's the Queen of Heaven in Jeremiah, in my opinion, not Asherah. Asherah is the mother, Astarte is the maiden, and Anat is death. So it's the triple goddess there. And so Astarte is one King Solomon's worshiping. That's where the Kadesha and the ritual sex is, and that this tradition carries on. And then as you flip, and my argument is that these are all old matriarchal indigenous peoples' traditions. And that as you flip from matriarchy to patriarchy, the Kadesha holy women get knocked out of business. So they still keep having temple sex in the Venus temples of Aphrodite and Roman Venus. The temple sex continues right on, but they're no longer holy women. They're just whores. So they've been devalued once you flip into because the Greeks are totally patriarchal. The Greeks and Romans are totally patriarchal, but the earlier traditions were rooted in these old matriarchal traditions. And so you see the women losing their status as holy women as you flip from the older Mesopotamian traditions to the later Greek and Romans. And this is taking place in the Old Testament with Astarte, when they're cutting down the Asherah poles and blaspheming Astarte, calling her Ashtoreth, which means shameful Astarte. They're really like knocking her down a peg. So you're seeing it happening, that they're taking these old traditions where the women were valued, doing this ritual prostitution and stuff, and the women benefited from it, and then they're losing their rights, they're losing their privileges, and they get devalued in the culture. And so that's kind of what I'm working on.
I wanted to say, just repeat something that you had said before that I thought that now that you say it, I mean, who knows, but saying that Anat is like one of the most fierce goddesses of all time, wearing hands and heads around her body, just like Kali. The fact that she really isn't mentioned in the Bible, you kind of said that maybe that they're like, it was too taboo to even mention her.
I call her she must not be named.
It's kind of cool.
That the silence on Anat speaks volumes. I mean, they mention Asherah plenty of times. They're always cutting down the Asherah pole. They have no problem talking about that. They have no problem talking about Astarte. They call her shameful Astarte because she's a sex goddess. But Anat, they don't mention her. They talk about Baal plenty, so we know Anat's part of the story because Anat and Baal are consorts. But they don't mention Anat. Well, she's the one who walks right up to Elohim, and threatens to kill him. And he doesn't rebuke her. He doesn't get mad at her. He doesn't say, "How dare you?" He gives her what she wants. He says, "You're right. There's no one more terrible and violent than you." So to me, it's pretty clear that she is incredibly powerful. And to even name her, even to identify her from the biblical writer's perspective, would be to make her real, to give her power, to give her identity. And so they can't defeat her, so they have to ignore her. And so I call her she who must not be named. But they allude to her because it shows up in place names and stuff. So we know that she's in the Bible. We know she was part of the culture.
And I just from what I've learned, which is not very much, but I see so many I don't know, similarities, parallels between some of the goddesses and like, where you study, Pat, and now reading like the tales from Ugarit and finding out there really is a lot of crossover. And I really had no idea. I mean, obviously, like I don't want to oversimplify things and say this God equals this God, but I'm sure however those things translate out.
I think sometimes you absolutely can. I mean, the Greeks certainly do in their writings. They equate the gods. So I think
right, yeah, they'll just say so-and-so is so-and-so. True. And on statues and things we see that.
And then as far as the Ugaritic, that was one of the most shocking things I learned about. In all of the research I've done on all this stuff is reading the Ugaritic texts and seeing that you're seeing the same gods from the Old Testament in their own mythology, which is something we had no access to until just our lifetimes. Like, this has only been published for the public since the 1970s.
60, 70 years. Yeah.
No, more recent than that. They found the things in 1928, but they weren't translated and made available to the public.
Right, translation.
And the most recent translations are brand new, like from the last 10 years. So it's really new information. And most people have not, grokked that, we've got an entire bit of mythology with Baal and Asherah and El all in their own storyline. And that's the myths of the Israelites. That's the native traditions prior to Yahweh coming on the scene. And then Yahweh is competing with Baal. Baal is the king of the gods in the Baal cycle. And then Yahweh is coming along and saying, I'm going to knock you out. I'm going to become king of the gods. And he's got to fight with Baal the entire First Temple period. Yahweh and the cult of Yahweh and the cult of Baal are fighting with one another. And so what are they fighting about? Like, there's a reason on the ground, I think, like at a cultural level, that they're fighting about. I think it's the human sacrifice. I think that's at the core. Idolatry and divination and superstition in general, but I think that the child sacrifice was a reality, and that it associates with the Baal cult across the Phoenician all the way up to Carthage. The connecting tissue is where they're worshiping Baal. They're doing these particularly gnarly human sacrifices. And I think that's at the heart of why they want to get rid of that cult, why there's an appetite in the community to overthrow the cult of Baal, is because it's like this gnarly, old, superstitious, bloodthirsty tradition. I mean, Anat's his girl, so he's running around with Kali basically at his side. They delight in slaughtering humans. It's a really nasty, it's a pretty gnarly tradition. And I can see why the Hebrew prophets were like against this guy. Like, it kind of makes sense. I think it fits.
Mm. Well, you all, it's Pat. I don't want to like cut anybody off before we switch into the new. But I want to make sure you. I want to. Do you have anything to plug? I want to make sure you guys can plug anything that you have coming up or whatever before we go. Sorry.
I have nothing to plug except I want everybody have low Saturnalia, enjoy Saturnalia. When you exchange gifts this Christmas, remember you're reenacting a Roman tradition that had to do with the giving of objects to friends in order to reconcile for the year. And, January 1st, the Festival of Janus was also a day of present giving. So Saturnalia, week-long festival. And then the day of New Year under Janus was giving objects to people you loved. If you wanted to reconcile during Saturnalia with someone who'd been a little bit of a contention, maybe a public or familial disgruntledness, giving them a gift, everything from like a little tchotchke to something very valuable. If you were being serious, you'd give them a serious gift. So as you exchange gifts this Christmas, just remember that, that's maybe where this tradition originates, because Romans really liked it. Very popular festival, one of the most popular festivals. You got the whole week off work, by the way. This week was...
We don't even get that now.
Well, imagine the ancient Romans gave slaves...
It's at this same time of year? Like around
it starts tomorrow. It's 17th through the 23rd. So in the Roman calendar right now, tomorrow slaves would no longer have to do slave labor. I know that sounds bad, but at the same time, the heads of households, masters and mistresses, would then lower their rank, where they would either serve themselves and or serve it become a more commonality, particularly with slaves that were domestic slaves in the household. There was this idea that they were given a week off. You want to call it vacation? It really wasn't vacation because everybody was still having to do things, but this idea of gift giving. Also, there would be a informal lack of a better term, king, like a commoner, like some Joe citizen, would be made king, and then he would be in charge of the festivities. There was a lot of merrymaking, a lot of partying, a lot of drinking during this period in Rome, and there would be a king appointed, and he would just be like the king of fun, the party animal. And so, like, this was a very serious festival for the Romans to blow off steam, but also get preparatory for the beginning. Again, remember, Julius Caesar changes the calendar a little bit, and then it gets changed even more. But, like, the beginning of the year, beginning in January, is a kind of a new thing in the first century CE, and was definitely changed under Julius Caesar in the first century BCE. So Janus becomes increasingly important, to where it's also this idea of giving gifts to people in honor to, instead of just closing the year out with gifts, you're also beginning the year with gifts. So this is a within a 2-week period, you have a bunch of gifts given among people in order to not only reconcile, but to promote friendship and happiness and all these things as well. And lamps. Lamps were a very common gift at the Festival of Janus, because, New Year, start off with a new lamp.
That's great. I love the idea of reconciliation instead of giving gifts just to give gifts, if that makes sense. That's awesome. Janice, I'm going to write that down, and I got to take a look at that. Well, Ed, do you have anything you want to plug before you?
Great way to finish up, Pat.
Yeah, and Ed and I are going to hang out in the back and chat up.
Yeah, please do. I'm really glad to see you both be able to talk. Thanks you all for coming. Thank you for everybody in the audience for sticking around. And I guess that's it from Ancient Myths, festivals, whatever it was we talked about, from Sumer to Rome and Canaan, everywhere. Right, is that it, Wes? Do I need to do a song and dance? Thank you.
Thank you, Wes.
Thank you for visiting us on Patreon to support Skeptic Haven. We're a humanist media group that produces shows and social media posts to support science, skepticism, humanism, and critical thinking. We focus on topics that deserve more exposure. For example, the treatment of women in Iran, prejudice against the transgendered, the reality of scientific findings, the unpublicized harm that too often happens within religious communities, and finding of joy after one leaves religion. We currently have 5 shows, each with its own focus. The Sunny Spot, Science and Knowledge. The Bible Says What, highlighting illogical and often immoral behavior in that supposedly perfect book. Secular Soapbox, Current Affairs and Visits with Other Atheists. Women Atheists Unloads, Social and Human Rights Issues, and most recently, The Global Atheists, a long overdue platform from around the world by and for atheists of many cultures. Now here's the money pitch. Skeptic Haven has a core of 3 executive producers and a team of almost 20 people. Each one of them volunteers. We've been scratching and inching along for a while now, trying to get to the point where we're self-sufficient financially, but we're not there yet. We're kind of far from it. So we need your help getting up to that point. Look at this content. We're so proud of what we've done here. We're so proud of this work and hope to get this to a larger audience. Your support will not only help us get our infrastructure up to spec, but give us some income to boost our exposure on social media. You'll find us all over the internet, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, see if I can get them all, Discord, Twitch now, and most recently Mastodon. And once your dollars allow it, we will get ourselves up on as a podcast too, all our episodes. So thank you for supporting the Skeptic Haven mission. We hope that our work will result in more science education, more compassion, more knowledge about others, understanding of each other, and living together in coexistence in this world. Please write to us with any feedback, ideas, suggestions for topics, guests, anything of interest to you. Facebook Messenger is usually best, but really you can use anything. Our email is info@skeptichaven.com. Thank you for your encouragement. We look forward to chatting with you in any show's chat. Please subscribe on Skeptic Haven on YouTube like the videos as you watch them. That really helps a lot. And click on the bell to be notified of upcoming episodes, of course. And one more thing. As a patron, you have the ability to come into our shows from out of the chat room and ask a question of our guests. Just let us know in the chat, and we'll send you a link to join the show. So that's it. Kind of short and sweet. Be kind, take care of each other, and we'll see you at YouTube.